Scott, you're completely right. We've got to manage our financial matters first for this to be profitable. Like I said earlier, every single time that we touch this crop, you got to pay somebody to do that. Mechanization is key with corn and soybean, any kind of grain crop. It's mechanized. That's why there is a little bit more room for profitability. There's a lot of similarities right now in the hemp industry with the tobacco industry. I know I'm biased to talk about that because that's the farming operation that I come from, but I'm sure you all know where the tobacco industry is right now. It's not extremely profitable. So we don't want to see hemp turn into that by any stretch of the means. So you're onto something 100% right there. This past year when I was in the county as an extension agent, the folks that I saw that made well off of hemp were those that went into the year with realistic expectations and good, sound financial information. The folks that I saw that did not have as good of a year as they wanted to did the exact opposite. They went into it with blind hope and thought that it was a silver bullet. So again, I think if I said don't risk more than you're willing to use, if it's too good to be true, it probably is. Third thing, manage your expectations. This is not a crop you can take to Bungie and drop off like corn and soybeans. Not yet, at least.
And there's a couple of important key factors. And I think, Boyd, didn't you guys try some direct seed, high CBD stuff on the farm?
We did direct seed. We learned a lot. The first couple plantings struggled a lot.
Right.
The last couple plantings, when we learned more how to do it, got better. And we had a really tough year this year with the moisture and humidity, the seedling disease.
Right.
But
that's going to be key, though. The direct seed of the high CBD plant, I think, is going to be absolutely key in bringing
Right.
those production prices down.
Right.
You know, the two missing factors are weed control, pest control. Weed control, pest control, if they're in place, then the silage harvest, the bag storage, the wet storage, the massive dryers and extraction, it's all there. It's weed control, pest control, I think is. What would you say, Boyd?
Correct. And on the direct seeding, because the cost of the seed is so much lower than clones and others, feminized seed, for example, you can plant some higher rates. You already have people out there doing some of the weed control anyway, so they can rogue for males, for example. Or if you're going for a dual crop, you can let it go to seed, harvest it, tumble the seed out, and collect the floral material then.
And I will say, I don't know, again, not to get back to this data issue, but I don't know if we have enough information where we can say how this is going to be grown long term. There's a lot of experimentation going on out there. Obviously, there's connections to the tobacco industry. In East Tennessee, we have some connections to the tomato industry with some of the plasticulture systems we see. There's definitely a field crop component that is worthwhile to be explored. But again, until we know how that's going to end up emerging and what market we're going to be providing is the other big one. Because if you look at, if we did, say in a few years, perfect planting high density CBD rich varieties, how many acres would we truly need for that commodity if we end up getting to the place where we're producing that sufficient amount? And so again, it filters back to, do we really understand where that market demand is, and then how we end up translating that into the production methods that are applicable to produce the crop for that demand. And so again, we just don't have the data to speak whether it's going to be part of a rotation or whether it's something completely independent.
I want to touch on something that Boyd brought up too about the disease and what we've been talking about with weeds and all these agronomic controls. This is more than important. This summer, I think that every single hoe was bought out of Graves County, Kentucky, because that's how we were controlling weeds. Okay, Lowe's and Folders and all the farm stores that didn't have any left. All right, there's no Roundup Ready. There's no Roundup Ready hemp. We're not out there spraying in-season weed control. The more weeds you have, the higher chance for disease pressure. This summer, I'm preaching to the choir here, was extremely wet. Okay, it was extremely wet. What does wet weather bring? Disease. Okay, and unfortunately, we don't have a lot of chemical control for our disease yet. Hopefully, that is coming down the pipeline, and it's not. the technology that we do have is great, but it's nothing that we're used to in conventional agriculture: corn, soybeans, tobacco, cotton, rice, have you. So that's a very important factor that I would encourage anyone that is in production to consider: weed control, chemical control, disease control, things like that. So.
Yeah, I was related to the pest. You know, until we get I'll say local genetics. You know, most of the genetics that are coming into the state are coming from Oregon or Colorado primarily. Some of that disease is coming in on those clones that are being shipped off into the state where, you know, last year you didn't see this. I'm imagining we're going to see something we didn't even see this coming season coming in. So, you know, a big opportunity, even when it comes to mold, you know, having some genetics that are ready for our humidity and our wet season.
I just got one thing to say about that. If you do get plants in from another state, you find a disease issue, call your inspector to come out and take a look at it. This summer, we had a rust in Tennessee that had never been found in the U.S. before. It showed up in several states. In Virginia, it was devastating. In Tennessee, we just saw it scattered here and there with a few leaf spots. We had some russet mites come in a couple years ago. So the interstate movement of hemp plants has been great, but keep an eye out for diseases and make sure you let your inspector know if you see anything.
So my one little, you know, I'm not the farmer up here, and there's some really good experts here on this panel, but I will say, well, I think one thing that's missing on this disease side is soil health, and the practices that are happening with soil and maintaining soil health, not using cover crops, not using more sustainable regenerative practices. I think that could be a factor here. But your original question was related to, you know, what's going on. Everybody here has been talking about essentially what I call a horticultural model of production, right, with all this hand labor and stuff. Before the 2014 Farm Bill, there were CBD products on the market. Those CBD products were coming from largely from European-derived hemp biomass, and they were not using that model at all. They were taking fiber crops, they were topping them. It was lower in CBD, but it was high enough that they could get extracts from it. There is a sort of an agricultural model here that could potentially work, and I think ultimately, I just don't know how. I don't know if this horticultural model sustains and lasts. I'm really curious.
I'd like to say something about that too, because we have seen in Western Kentucky, we've seen some soil destroyed because of hemp production in a very, very short amount of time. In 2 years, two to 3 years of production, we've seen erosion like we haven't seen in the last 20 or 30 years because of the intense cultivation of that soil. I mean, we're primarily a no-till zone, corn, soybeans, wheat, everything no-till, and now we have put into production, we've turned soil that shouldn't have been turned, and now have really ruined some land that had been productive in the past. And so you're absolutely right. This soil health to be considered in terms of something that's sustainable, and it's so, you know, it's so I don't know the word I'm looking for. I mean, that's part of what this plant's applauded for is the soil remediation and the sustainability of using this plant. And at the same time, there's some sides of this that's taken us to the dust bowl because of what we've done to the soil. So it's a huge problem, no doubt.
And one last thing that just kind of occurred to me on that too is when you look at it from a traditional field crop standpoint, I have no doubt that we can advance the technology rapidly so that we get developed chemicals to control diseases, control pests, and to control weeds. The challenge is going to be is the consumer or the processors that are buying the product, are they going to want to have the hemp produced under those conditions? And the answer to that is I'm not so sure. And so all of a sudden then if you don't have those tools in your toolbox and there's a demand by the consumer that it be grown under a specific or very restrictive number of production methods, then I think that will dictate how we produce it more than anything. I have no doubt that we can get there from a technology standpoint in terms of controlling some of these. What I worry about is what does that do to the different subcomponents of the market demand?
Completely agree with you that the new trend is for less chemical use and things like that as well. But the last thing I want to say about disease is if you go online, the University of Kentucky, I'm not saying this because I'm an employee of the University of Kentucky, but they do have a very good hemp disease website that has a lot of good pictures, a lot of good information. So I encourage you to check it out. It's I believe it's KentuckyHempDisease.com. So.
Great. I think we have time for one more question from the audience. Okay, I've got a quick speed round for you guys. If for regulatory reasons you can't answer this question or any other, but we'll start with you, Eric. What's the, this has been maybe a bubble. I'm not an economist, but this has been a crazy Wild West last couple years. What's the most bananas thing you have seen so far? Craziest thing. What strikes you? What blew your mind?
The craziest thing.
You can name two if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, I just honestly the fact that we went from 3,500 farmers to 18,000 almost 18,000 overnight, that blew me away. I never expected it to grow quite that quickly. So I know a lot of people are excited about this crop, but I hope more farmers take the slower approach and are a little bit more cautious in approaching this.
Yeah, last year in 2018, we had 226 licensed hemp growers, and we thought we were almost overwhelmed by that. And then this year, during the growing season, we had 3,800. So, and then there are some individual craziness, but I'm not going to talk about that now.
I think I'll touch on the individual craziness because I know Samantha touched on security. Man, the craziest thing I remember is we were going into our warehouse and two things. Guy literally walked over to my team as they're moving from the reefer trucks off into the warehouse and said, "Hey, can I buy some weed?" And then later that night, which we were having security because literally we had the Gibson County Sheriff's Department on the farm, and then we used a private security company at the warehouse in Jackson. The security company was coming that night, and when my guys called me and said, "Hey, we just had this guy walk up and say he wants to buy some weed," and I was like, "Get those guys out there immediately." And then about 3 o'clock in the morning, it's a railroad track behind our warehouse. 4 guys dressed in black came over the railroad tracks coming to the warehouse, and the security guards just shined the light on them. They skedaddled, but security is, yeah, definitely.
I think the craziest thing I've seen is our university listed on companies' websites that we're working with that we've never heard of. And it's happened multiple times, and actually we did know of a couple of those, and 2 of those individuals are serving time right now. So it's interesting.
So there's a reason that I put security on that presentation. We've been raising it for 5 years now. I'll tell a personal story. I can't tell any University of Kentucky stories and things I've heard, but one of the craziest things I've done is I remember one Sunday afternoon after church, Dad and I finished up dinner and we went out to the farm to set some trip lines for folks that had been coming off the railroad tracks, still in our hemp, and we collected, I think, 11 pairs of bolt cutters that summer because people were literally coming out to the farm. We had about 5 acres there right across the railroad tracks. They'd come out, they'd cut a hole in the fence, and they'd pull out whole hemp plants, like the size of the ones I was showing on the PowerPoint, not seedlings, like whole plants, and they were hauling them off in their backpacks. Dad finally caught one. He didn't come back, we'll put it that way.
I will say one of the things, obviously, just the magnitude of the interest in the crop. The other one that really surprised me, particularly last year when we were going all across the state, was, how diverse the demographics were, right? So you would get all different walks of life that we're interested in, and I'll get myself in trouble with this one, but you'd have the old dirty hippies that are interested in doing kind of the organic basket weaving type stuff, and then you get the high end, 3-piece suit Wall Street types that are looking at it from an investment and pharmaceutical type stuff. So you get a really interesting swath of people not just from agriculture as well. There's several of you that are obviously more traditional farmers, but we got exposure both from an extension and a TDA standpoint to people that had very little information as to what agriculture was in our state that allowed us to educate them on that. So I look at that as one of the more shocking things, but also one of the things that I think was really a positive out of this is we did get to tell an agriculture story to some people that maybe weren't exposed to that. And I look at that as really positive when we're able to end up sitting down and talking to people that maybe don't have that appreciation, that are interested and passionate. Now again, as an economist, I hate crushing people's dreams, but it is something where it is a very positive thing to have people engaged and interested in what we do.
I'm going to start with you, Aaron. We're just going to do a last word back here, 1-2 sentences that you know that you want to make sure folks heard you or your observation from what we talked about today.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I will end up just saying is, I mean, know why you're growing it, know who you're growing it for, try to remove as much of that risk as possible. You're never going to be able to fully get rid of it. Try to end up making sure that you understand who you're doing business with and just protect your own interests. I do think it's really a great point to say don't put more money on the table than what you're willing to lose. I think that's a fantastic ethos to end up going with.
So 3 things. Number 1, don't invest more than you're willing to lose. Number 2, the birth of anything isn't pretty. We're in the birth of a new industry right now. We can't expect it to be a smooth ride. And then lastly, if it sounds too good to be true, it more than likely is.
Yeah, I would echo those and just add that I think it is going to be a piece. As Samantha mentioned earlier, it could be a piece of the solution for some. And that's what the gentleman in the back alluded to a minute ago. I mean, if this is something that I believe can go into a rotation somewhere, and it can be a way to diversify our farming operations, and it can be another piece to sustainable agriculture as a whole. It's not magic, but it can be a piece.
I would say there's safety in numbers, and so it's kind of an advertisement for the TNHIA, but I would say definitely would invite you all, if you're not already a member, become a member of the Tennessee Hemp Industry Association. We're looking at, we have 2 regional chapters right now, in addition to our state chapter, the West Tennessee. David Rippey is the president of that. They meet in Jackson, Tennessee, monthly at Jackson State Community College. And then we have our East Tennessee sub-chapter, but we're looking at expanding that across the state to make it more locally because, you know, it's the ability to just call somebody on the phone if you see something, or being able to go out to their farm. I spent, before we put our company in execution mode and actually did our first grow, literally I spent that last season on member farms, giving my free time to just learn, making sure that I knew as much as I could learn.
We will continue to work with farmers to build this program with as few regulations as possible.
And I love Annie, TDA, Commissioner Hatcher. They are a great partner in everything that we're doing. Just had to get
No,
that.
thank you.
Yeah, I would say my one piece of advice is to make sure to educate your local, state, and federal officials, your representatives, about this industry, about this crop. Invite them out to your farm or your business, and we need to educate them because a lot of them don't understand some of the challenges that we're facing as an industry. So it's critical to bring them in, and also your law enforcement.
Great. Well, I'm also going to take the last word for just a second. We're obviously in a down farm economy. Those numbers that you said in terms of ramping up, that's because there's real desperation to try to figure out some kind of silver bullet solution. I love this balanced approach we had. I would challenge all of us, you know, we as an organization represent farmers. So let's take this with humbleness and build something. Let's build it in the right timing. I do think, and Samantha, I'm going to piggyback sort of what you said, my summary, you know, if you think about if this is the end of a bubble, we had a pretty big bubble about 20 years ago. In the aftermath of that, we've got our top 5 global market cap companies that that were not on the board before that bubble. So there will be some opportunities. I asked what you guys would invest in. My list would be team. That would be the top one. So I'm going to pitch back to SBX. They put the time in, the effort in to build this. Any of the examples we've had fits within that. So if you want to talk to us after that, let's first thank these guys. This was gold, so really appreciate it. And let's thank Boyd and Steve and Jenny and the SBX team for everything they did to host this. And we're adjourned, so thank you.